started?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. So happy you all could join us. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Want to give a special thank you to our partners at North Point for helping with organizing and also getting folks here and hosting us in this space tonight. We are hosting this event in recognition of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is this month. And we have this wonderful panel of experts, both who work in community, but also folks who work in our office in the County Attorney's Office. My name is Jen White. I'm the Director of Community Affairs. And we'll go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves as well.
Go ahead. You can start.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. My name is Deanna Smith, and I currently serve as the Director of the Domestic Abuse Service Center, where I manage various contracts, partnerships, criminal justice partnerships, and directly supervise a combination of Hennepin County Attorney Legal Service Specialists and community advocates. Happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Heidi DeFord. I'm an assistant Hennepin County Attorney in the Child Protection Division. But I'm here sort of with two hats on. Not only am I an attorney in the office, I'm also a survivor of domestic violence. So I'll get more into my story later, but I have a unique perspective in having been on essentially both sides of the table.
And I am Cecilia Olson, and I work for the Minneapolis Police Department and for the Neighborhood Safety Department with the city. And I have been here for about 5 years, and I am more boots on the ground victim advocacy. My job is to follow up with 911 callers that call police for assistance in regards to domestic violence and provide support, safety planning, protection order writing, and then most importantly, resource referrals and support for those victim survivors. Appreciate you guys being here.
And so,
Are we able to take photos or pictures or?
oh, yes, and we're also recording too, but absolutely, please feel free. So for the purposes of this conversation, I just want to point out, obviously domestic violence shows up in many different ways within a family, with friends, partners, things like that. For the purposes of this discussion, we'll be focusing on intimate partner violence, just because that is kind of specific and unique. But wanted to point that out, just we acknowledge that domestic violence is broader than just intimate partner violence, but for the purposes of this discussion and to kind of keep the conversation going and focused, we're going to be focusing on intimate partner violence. So I would love, Deanna, if you could just maybe give an overview of some of the work that happens at DASC.
Sure, absolutely. So again, my name is Deanna Smith, and I am the Director of the Domestic Abuse Service Center. And basically, what do we do at DASC, right? And the easiest way to think about it is really that the center serves as a place where victims can receive multiple services in one centralized location. So services such as working with culturally specific advocates. I cannot share with you the importance of an individual or a victim having the option of working with somebody who either looks like them, speaks their language, and or understands the different cultural barriers that they may face, because that truly looks different for each and every one of us. Victims also have the option of working with a prosecution team as well as with pro bono attorneys for free legal consultation and representation. Our prosecution team consists of 2 MPD sergeants, probation officer, shout out to Julie right there, and a city attorney and a county attorney. Now, this prosecution team investigates all gone on arrival cases at DASC. And what a gone on arrival case means and essentially is that the police are called because there is some type of domestic that happened at a home or an establishment in the community. And then once the police arrive, the suspect is gone, hence gone on arrival. And the team works really hard to review the police reports, right, that go in front of a city or a county attorney to see if there's enough probable cause, which is really just a fancy word for evidence, to see if they can go ahead and charge the case and then go ahead and issue a warrant for that individual's arrest. In addition to that, like I said, we have a number of partners on site at DASC, including the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department, that helps keep all of the community safe, as well as our staff safe as well. And then we have district court on site. The primary service that we offer at the Domestic Abuse Service Center is assisting individuals in obtaining orders for protection. DASC really is in charge of submitting and filing approximately 80% of all of the orders for protection that happen in Hennepin County. So that's a little bit about us.
Thank you, appreciate
Absolutely.
that. And then Cecilia, I think you're really unique in that you're located in community at the 4th Precinct, which there is a high volume of calls in the neighborhood here. But can you speak a little bit about what is unique about your position and how community really has that real direct access and support?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, I have been embedded within the Minneapolis Police Department for just over 5 years now. And my job is special because it really provides a resource not only for victims, but also for officers. And it really is a bridge between the two to try to create trust and access of law enforcement with individuals that are experiencing domestic violence. And so one of the main aspects of my job and something that's unique about it is just the easy accessibility of me. So I am located in the 4th Precinct. I have my own office there. And so it really creates an easy access for individuals that are experiencing domestic violence to come and meet with me. It's also a really great opportunity for officers to do a really soft, easy handoff for, an individual that's calling 911. They're on the scene with somebody dealing with a crisis right then and there. They are able to bring them directly to the precinct and meet with me. And I really do try to do casework, crisis intervention, safety planning within 24 hours of the 911 call that has happened. Obviously, there are exceptions for the weekend, but I really do try to get in touch with that victim, survivor, 911 caller within 24 hours, again, to do that safety planning, resource referral. And then I also do work very closely with DASC and have a relationship with them and file order of protections through them. That is one of my main tasks. I do file quite a few order protections, especially for victims here on the north side. But again, the main aspect I always say is I'm a bridge between the police and the community. That's why I really took this position, was to really help educate the community on why police do what they do, and then also vice versa, educating officers and law enforcement on why victims act the way they do, why victim survivors might recant, why they might go back to their partner. Really just trying to create understanding for both individuals and to be a resource for both. I'm really excited. I do say that I'm citywide. Majority of my work is done on the north side because of the level and number of calls that we do have. That was one of the main reasons why I was put in the 4th Precinct, is because we have a very high call capacity for 911 calls for domestics. But obviously there are ones all, throughout the city. So I do try to help out there when I can. But I always say the accessibility part is key. It's really nice to, even for people with DASC that not necessarily can get downtown to get a protection order, or don't have transportation, or just don't have that accessibility to get the resources that they want. I myself can either meet with them or they can meet with me safely at the precinct.
Yeah.
So
I was just going to say, equal access to justice is something that is incredibly important to us, and in this partnership as well. CC is able to go out to individuals' homes who are, elderly or vulnerable or have some kind of disability that is preventing them from having access to coming down to the center and to access services. And then also, our cultural specific advocates that we have speak Spanish, Somali, Hmong, Hindi, Nawari, and Nepali. So we're able to assist should there be a language barrier to help streamline that process as well.
Love that. So speaking of the partnerships, we don't do this work alone. We rely on our community partners as well. Can you maybe talk about some of the organizations that we partner directly with in DASC?
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys were able to see a number of them here in the other room. And if you haven't, please stop by. We couldn't do our work without them, especially for our work being rooted in community. That is something that is incredibly vital and important to the individuals that we serve. We respect that, we honor that, and we want to continue to do better if we should be doing better. So in order to offer the services that we currently do, we contract with SIWA, Esperanza United, the Division of Indian Work, Asian Women United, and DAP, the Domestic Abuse Project, to provide intervention and prevention services to individuals who use abusive behaviors.
That's really important. I also would like to shift us a little bit because there's no real kind of look or a typical DV victim survivor. Really, everyone comes from all different walks of life. Heidi, would you mind maybe sharing a little of your story since you have also lived experience and kind of really what that means to you and that really it can impact anyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I had stated in my introduction, I'm not only an attorney in the office, but I'm also a survivor of domestic violence. So I was in a violent relationship for about 12 years. So I went all through law school, worked full-time actually for Hennepin County, went to law school at night, and was also being severely physically and emotionally abused during that entire time. I got my first job as an attorney then in the Stearns County Attorney's Office. He joined me there in that community. And it was in 2007 then that I was beaten really to the point of being unrecognizable, not only to others, but to myself. It was about 2.5 hours. Luckily, at that time, I had sort of planted some little seeds along with some trusted people to let them know that I wasn't safe, that there was other things going on in my life, because this was a really tightly guarded secret. My family didn't know. My colleagues, they probably didn't think things were great, but they didn't know, really to the extent of what I was living through. The unique thing, in addition to that, is I was hired in the Stearns County Attorney's Office to prosecute domestic violence cases. So I was prosecuting domestic violence cases while I was at the same time living that. So I had to, balance my own personal feelings with the evidence to make sure that I did the right thing by the cases that I was handling. And I also had to deal with not only the trauma that I was experiencing, but then the trauma that other people were experiencing. So luckily, I had planted those little seeds, and unbeknownst to me, my colleague who had also planted some additional seeds along the way that I didn't know about. So when I didn't show up for work one morning, she actually called me, and in the midst of being beaten quite severely, he actually let me answer the phone, and she simply asked, should I make that call? And I said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. She said, are you okay? Yep, I'm good, yep. And then it was a short time later that I had plainclothes officers at my door. So what I had kept as a very tightly held secret could easily have been front page news, given that I was prosecuting domestic violence cases at the time. So I always talk about those women, right? We always talk about those women experience that. We are those women. I am those women. There isn't anybody who's particularly those women. It's all of us. We are all, it sort of crosses every barrier. You can't tell by looking at me, right? Oh, she seems strong, she seems smart. I am, and I'm still a victim, right? I came from a good family, I'm college educated, I have a law degree, I'm still a victim. It's not my fault. It was, the matter of the circumstances, and I think that's sort of why it's important to me. I also think it's what makes me good at what I do, because I try to remember all the time that the work we do is real people, real families, real victims that are experiencing this. It's not a case number. We have volumes and volumes of work that we do, and we don't have to go home to them. But I had to go home to things. I had to deal with this. I had to now go into work beaten to a bloody pulp, right? My eyes swollen, almost shut, and nobody knew about this. But I went in really 2 days later. That's sort of the biggest takeaway, I guess, for me that I try to express to my colleagues, that it's a case for you, it's a real life. And I shared the story with my colleagues that the county that actually was handling the prosecution of my case, because it was conflicted out, their victim advocacy services couldn't hold a candle to what DASC and Hennepin offers to the victims here. I was calling in OFP violations because I was lucky enough to have connections with law enforcement, so I could call them and tell them right away, even though I didn't want to, and they would get referred over to this other county attorney's office, and then their victim advocate called me and said, I didn't know this was going to be a lifelong obligation. Yeah, guess what? It's a lifelong obligation for me. So that it's resonated with me, and it still sort of chokes me up to think about that, because I was dealing with some really heavy trauma and I was trusting them, and their response was, really? I got another case from you? No, you're dealing with my life. So I try to convey that to my colleagues and really anybody who is forward facing, and really anybody, that it seems counterintuitive and it seems really frustrating to deal with victims, but there's lots of reasons why we do the things we do. Part of it's control, right? Like if I'm in control of things, I know what's going to happen that day. Once I call the police, somebody else is in control, the prosecutor takes over, the victim's advocate, I got nothing, right? I'm at the mercy of everybody else. So of course I'm not going to be cooperative. Of course I'm going to, push back on you, because I don't want to be the one that gets the blowback. So those are the things that make it important to me, and why I sort of understand both sides of things, and why I think it's really important to share my story, because most people have sort of this image from TV or whatnot of what we think a victim should be or how a victim should act, and that's just not the case.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
You just said something that's really important, right? And through training of, either the bench or, training prosecutors, or even some law students, right? I have asked the question, what do you think a victim should look like, sound like, how should they present? And 99% of the time, a lot of the individuals will raise their hand and they should say, well, they should be timid. They should be crying. They should be meek, right? They should not have a ton of confidence, just, a number of things. When the reality is, as service providers, we have to be very mindful that victims, can present in various ways, meaning trauma presents in different ways. Victims can be really upset, right? And it has everything to do with what they are going through and nothing to do with the service provider, the responding officer, the advocate, the judge on the case, the prosecutor, right? It has everything to do with what they are going through. And I think that's just something for all of us to keep in mind and to remember, to not take things personally.
We always say that, especially working for law enforcement, and I really do my best to educate officers on this frequently, as to, we talk about what a cooperative victim is, talking about them being cooperative in regards to giving a statement and following through with prosecution. And for a lot of people, that is not what they're looking for when they're calling 911. When a victim survivor is calling 911, they are looking for the abuse to stop.
Mm-hmm.
They are not looking ahead on what's going to happen down the road. They are looking at that point, as we as kids are taught that when we are in fear, when we are in danger, we call 911 for help. And that has been ingrained in our brains to do that. And so they call 911 because they know that they're being hurt and they want that to stop. They not necessarily wanting anything to happen down the line. And it's frustrating for law enforcement. It's frustrating for service providers at times, because we in our minds have this end goal as to what we think is going to be in their best interest, or what's going to be best for this victim in our minds. And we, again, like you mentioned, we have to remind ourselves that these are people's lives. We don't have to go home to that environment. We don't know what their day-to-day life looks like. And so if all we can do is get that abuse to stop, even just for 24 hours, we are helping that person. And if we can provide resources down the line to stop that completely, then great. But again, we as service providers really try to educate, again, not only law enforcement, but other service providers, family members, supporters of domestic violence, because it's really hard to be a supporter of someone that's going through domestic violence. It's really hard to be a family member or, a close friend, knowing that this is something that your loved one is going through, and you can't quite understand what needs to be done, what you need to do to get them out of that environment. Just tell yourself that they just want this abuse to stop. And they themselves know what that looks like. And so let them take the lead on that. Let them tell you what they want. And so, it's just something that we talk a lot about when we're doing trainings and just, education in regards to domestic violence. There's no right way of helping a survivor of domestic violence. It's letting them tell you what they want.
If I can just add to that, people come to me now knowing my history, or sometimes after community events, sometimes, friends or people that I know other places. And I always focus on how can I make them safer, right? Like it's not my job to get them to leave, and it might not be what they want, but I try to convey to them, like, I want to make you safer. Like, what do you want, right? Like, do you want to go? Do you want to go? So, do you want to start over, or do you want to try to stay in this relationship? Or what do you want, and how can I make you safer? And does that mean, some of the things I did, packed a bag and left it at my office. I had some cash there. I had another ID. I started to tell a few people, how can I help you be safer, and think about the next time and try to be real honest. Like, there's going to be a next time. So let's figure out how, you have some sort of network in place to do that. But I'm going to be here if you decide to go back, or if you decide to leave. My phone is on. I'll come get you. We'll do what we have to do. It's that, what kept me quiet, and I'm assuming what keeps a lot of people, it's real embarrassing to tell your friends and colleagues that this is what you're dealing with, especially when you're somebody that people think has got it together. Yeah, I don't have it together. You really think I want people to know that? So when I did trust somebody, the worst thing they could have done was say, like, why do you leave, or what's wrong with you, and I was lucky that I had colleagues who, the person I trusted didn't do that. She just, sort of took the lead, and I've taken her lead then in how to help people that now ultimately come to me. So.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize that success means different things to different people, right? When a victim is picking up the phone and calling 911 again, right, they want that violence to stop. Most victims want, the violence to stop. They don't want the relationship necessarily to end. They want that individual to get help and to change those underlying behaviors, right? And even if they're picking up the phone and calling 911, they don't necessarily know what's going to be expected of them throughout the system if someone is charged, and what that means long-term for their family as well. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. Additionally, right, we also need to keep in mind is that domestic violence is a pattern crime. It is rarely resolved with the first intervention, and it takes a victim an average of 7 to 8 times to leave their abuser, okay? With, leaving being the most dangerous time for victims to try to leave the individual who is using harmful behaviors. And so, oftentimes law enforcement are the primary and first responders. And as service providers and everybody here, that's why it's so important. And they may not be, it may be one of you sitting in this room, right? But to take disclosure very seriously, because that is a big step for a victim to take, right? To come to you and to say, I need help. But success for us and for our staff, and the way that I train our advocates in particular, right? What that means, knowing what we know, those stats that I just shared with each and every one of you, right, is how a victim either walks out our doors or hangs up that phone. Because knowing that it is likely to happen again, success to me matters that they're going to pick up that phone, they're going to trust us again, and they're going to walk through those doors again, right, to get help when they are ready. They may not want to choose any of the resources or services, right? Perhaps it's a safety plan that they leave with. That's good, right? Oftentimes that's the best plan, quite frankly. But what matters to us is that when they're ready, they know that we're here, and that we're here without judgment, right? My job is not to judge at all. And I think, and I've had a number of women share this with me, especially with family members and friends. They'll say, well, they said, they love me too much to watch me go through this. That is one of the most dangerous things that we can do as support people or a support system. Because the reality is that we are playing into exactly what the individual who's using those harmful behaviors is doing, because they want to isolate that victim even more. Right? And so if we're pulling away that cord and saying, I can't watch you go through this, it's too much, right? We are actually pushing that victim further into the abuser's arms to use even more power and control over them and to isolate them further.
I think that really speaks to what advocacy actually means. And it's not doing what we want for an individual, it is helping that individual with what they want. That was something that was taught to me by a mentor, and it really made a lot of sense in trying to understand how I could support a loved one of mine who was in a domestic violence situation, that it was not what I wanted for her, but how do I support her in what she wants for herself. That kind of leads a segue. I think that language and words also really matter. Can you all maybe talk a little bit about some of the phrases or terms that we use that can be more victim-centered when we're working with or talking about domestic violence survivors?
I can start a little bit with what not to say. So don't ask, why do they stay? Why aren't you leaving? Because what we're doing in that moment is you're taking accountability off of the individual who's using harmful behaviors, right? And we are placing it onto the victim. Nobody would ever ask for this, right? This is something that is being done to them, and we have to remember that. In addition, do not speak over or think that you know the victim's situation better than they do. They are truly the experts in their own situation, and here's why, right? I get to go home, I go to bed in my own environment, right? And that's it, right? That victim knows what makes their abuser tick. They know what makes them upset, right? I do not. And so to keep that in mind at all times. Also, just to make sure that if someone is disclosing to you, right, I believe you, I see you, I hear you, I am so sorry you are going through this. Don't say that you understand, because you don't. You don't. And we've had people share with us before, right? No, you don't. And you'll learn that quickly, right? But I hear you, I believe you, I'm here to support you. I'm not here to judge, right? And my door is always open.
I can speak to that too. Again, I always talk about, and in other words she's saying is validate.
Absolutely.
Really validate that this person is going through is crap. Is really crappy, and that this is not something that they should have to go through, and that it sucks to be in this type of situation, and it's stressful and it's hard, and it's okay to feel those feelings. And I talk a lot, not only with victim survivors, but also other service providers and other, law enforcement officers and advocates and support systems. And this work is hard. This work is draining, and it's okay to say that. And it's okay to say that you're tired and that your brain hurts, because secondary trauma is a thing. It very much is a thing. And I'm sure every service provider here can speak to that. But just, also validating your coworkers and your family members and that are doing this type of work, that are supporting somebody that's going through domestic violence, and validating their feelings as well, because those are valid. Again, I tell them a story all the time about, again, using the vocabulary of I understand. I have been put in my place more times than I'd like to say, because it really is a common phrase for us to say when people are in crisis or you're trying to support someone. You're like, I totally understand what you're coming from. And a victim survivor will put you in your place right away, and they will call you out and they will say, no, you don't. You have never been in my situation. You don't live in my home. You don't live in the fear that I have experienced. I myself have dealt with domestic violence myself, but my story is a whole lot different than her story or any other person that comes to me. So by saying that you understand, you're almost demoralizing or, demoralizing their situation. You're not validating how important and specialized their situation really is. And when you do that, you are creating an instant barrier. You're creating an instant wall between you and that victim survivor. And that goes for anybody. That can go for family members. That can be for anybody that's supporting someone with domestic violence. The words that you use really have an impact on their ability to actually open up to you, to utilize you down the road, whether it's, trying to get out or just trusting that whenever they're in that framework and frame of mind that they are ready to leave, they know that that one person is behind that phone and they know that that person's going to answer. That is huge to a victim survivor, because again, like she talked about, is the isolation thing is really big with domestic violence, and the words that you use can help them isolate you. But if you tell them, no matter what you do, you can dismiss your cases, you can cuss me out, you can tell me all these things, but no matter what, I'm always going to be at the end of that phone call, and I'm going to be there for you when you need me. That is extremely important for victim survivors, because domestic violence suspect, I guess I should say, that uses these tools, that's what they're trying to get rid of. They are trying to get rid of all these different tools and tactics that victim survivor can use to get out of that situation. And so isolating them from people that actually support them is, you're helping them reach their goal, like she said. So just tell them, I support you, I love you. Whenever you're in that state of mind that you just want to talk, or that you want someone that will support you, I will be there for you. I can be that person for you.
And empower them, right? Remember that enough has already been taken away from them. To lose a sense of who you are and what you stand for is one of the worst feelings that any individual can go through, right? I've worked with a number of people who have shared with me, Deanna, I would rather have a black eye than to be made to feel the way that I do inside, right? To lose a sense of identity, right? It's very hard and it's difficult. And so I think empowering them and recognizing that enough power and control has already been utilized over them, right? Give them something back by giving them a voice and a choice. That can do so much for somebody.
So the only thing I would add then is a couple things which is important to me. We often hear how people talk about, I think I said it before, those women, right? I know it's people within the work we do, and maybe it's well-meaning because we do get burned out and it's hard work and we do need to vent things out. But I think not only in how we speak to people who come to us for services or victims that we're working with, I think it's also important how we just talk about sort of the whole entity of domestic violence and those that experiencing it all the time, right? So if I'm sharing my story or my work or something with somebody else, the words I choose to talk about a victim survivor, it matters not just in court, not just when I'm working with that victim. It matters when I'm talking to a colleague. It matters when I'm talking to a friend. It matters if I'm, happen to come up because somebody saw something in the news about how this happened to, this kind of person, that we, name it and we call it out and we correct it, and we're mindful of sort of making it an us and them. Just like I said before, we are all those women. And I say women because that's where the statistics are, but it doesn't have to be women. Everybody who identifies however people identify are experiencing domestic violence. So I think that's an important message to send. The other thing, piggybacking off of Deanna related to sort of the damage of the psychological and what is taken away from you. I say it often, my bruises healed infinitely faster than my heart and my soul. And there's still issues, within me that are still there that I need to work on, as far as that trauma stays inside your body. You have, even when I share my story, sort of on the edges of it, and I haven't even delved into the deepness of it, I can feel sort of the physiological reaction of that. So imagine how that is when you're actually living it and experiencing it. And we wonder then why people aren't, cooperative and the kind of people that we want to work with and making it easy on us. It's, it's not easy to deal with this. It's not easy to deal with not only what's physiologically happening to you, but what's happening to your environment. So I think us being mindful of that again, and always remembering the humanity of the people that we're working with, and the people, and people that we may not even be working with. I mean, there's stories in the news every day, and I'm sure there's experiences that we have with our friends and families and colleagues every day that we need to just use the platform every time that we have an opportunity to, if that's at the coffee shop or wherever, to remind people that this is a public health issue, right? Mm-hmm. This isn't a women's issue. This isn't a court issue. This is a public health issue. And I talk about, if you see violence, if you hear violence, Just like if you see a drunk getting into a car, leaving a bar, or leaving somebody's party, or swerving down the street, 9 times out of 10, most of us don't hesitate to call and say, like, this guy shouldn't be driving, right? Because that's a public health, that's a public safety issue. But we drive down the street and you see somebody get smacked in the face, or you're at a restaurant and you hear something, you're in a parking lot and you see something. How many of us are like, that's a family matter, I'm not going to get involved with that. That is not a family matter. That's a public health issue. That's a public safety issue. That person, if you saw somebody get punched in the mouth at a bar, or get, a dude hit another dude, we're going to say something about it. But if it's a couple, we're like, ooh, I don't want to get it. I don't want to be all up in their business. Their business is our business, right? If we don't make the community safer, if we don't let that perpetrator know, I see what you're doing, I'm going to do something about what you're doing, even though she can't or they can't. We perpetuate sort of that isolation. We perpetuate that sort of like, we don't talk about this kind of behavior. And it needs to be treated, in my opinion, just like we do when we see drunk drivers, or just like we do when we see any other crime, because this is a crime. It's not a family matter.
And it perpetuates so much other violence as well. Domestic violence is the underlying cause of so many other high-level crimes. Mass shootings, assaults, homicides, there's underlying trauma that individual has experienced, whether it's themselves or, secondary, it's a cycle. It's a cycle of violence that can be not necessarily, resolved completely, but we can break that cycle by dealing with domestic violence as the underlying cause.
Right. Early exposure to violence is the number one predictor of an individual's potential to be engaged in violence in the future as an adult, whether it be interpersonal or within their community. That really is the number one. And speaking as it from a public health perspective as well. I know the Office of Violence Prevention at the city had a CDC grant where one of our colleagues was working with young athletes in the high school. So how are we going back earlier and talking about teen dating violence? How are we really trying to work to get upstream and really start talking about it more as a community, but also educating youth really on how to have healthy behaviors and what to really look for and where they can turn to when they need that support. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I want to open it up for audience questions. And this one is, I guess we can kind of really go down some rabbit holes, but are there gaps that affect how you do your work that could really improve things from your perspective?
One of the gaps that we identified, I'm happy that we came up with a tangible solution for thus far. So at DASC, we not only serve petitioners, which is just a fancy word for victims, right? And then respondents, which is a fancy word for individuals who use harmful behaviors. And one of the things that I'd ask myself is exactly what Jen was just talking about, right? Knowing that, most women don't want the relationship to end. They want the violence to stop. How do we stop the violence, right? Let's take a look at the root. And there has been a shift throughout the state of Minnesota, right, to really provide more supportive, non-shameful services, right, to batterers, to hit pause and to say, hey, how did we get here, right? What did you witness when you were growing up, right? Because just like Jen shared, what we do know is that many individuals who use violence have either been subject to or witnessed it throughout some time in their lives, right? And so as a result, what we decided to do was to partner with the Domestic Abuse Project to create an intervention and prevention specialist position to work with respondents at the Domestic Abuse Service Center. And so what they really are doing is explaining to individuals who have just been served with an order for protection, right? This is what an order for protection is, right? This is what a violation means, right? And this is what you have been court ordered to complete. How can I help you enroll into domestic abuse programming at the, or batter intervention programming at DAP, in, helping you get a mental health evaluation, right? Let's make sure that you are made aware of your rights, but also, have you been ordered to surrender a firearm? How many people know how to do that? So that's preventing lethality right there, right? So the ultimate goal is providing education, supportive services, and creating healthy parents, right? Healthy partners and healthy community members, right? To really stop that violence, hit pause, right? And to make sure that they understand as well that in the state of Minnesota, 3 misdemeanor violations of an order for protection, guess what that equates? A felony, right? What does a felony do to your record? Can you get housing? Can you get a job, right? And if your ultimate goal, if you have kids together, is to be together and to address these underlying behaviors, right? Having a felony on your record isn't going to help you achieve those things, right? So we're really excited about that. That was a gap that we did identify, and that we are offering and that we have at the Domestic Abuse Service Center. Again, accountability is an important component of this position. It's not to help somebody get off of an order for protection. It's really to educate through a supportive and non-shameful lens, and to hit pause and to get those supportive services that individuals really need to address those underlying behaviors.
Anyone else want to answer on that one?
I think that covered
Yeah.
pretty good. I was like, mic drop.
So I just want to open up to audience questions if folks have questions or comments for our panelists here.
So my question for you guys here on this panel is, how do you address the clients or the individuals that come across to you who might be culturally different and might think that because you are not of the same ethnicity, or because you might have a different economic background, that you don't understand? How do you internalize that and still keep that balance of being able to understand their pain and or try to sympathize with it and give them that adequate help?
I can talk a little bit about that, especially, working in North Minneapolis. I can identify that I don't necessarily look like the community. And that was brought to my attention right away when I got this position. Lisa and I had a conversation like the first day I got the job. I'm going to call her out. And what barriers I was going to have to overcome by the work I was going to have to do. And I can probably say that I have done that. But I think the main way of doing that is, again, like I talked about before, is really letting the victim survivor lead the way, letting them tell me what they want, and with my education, my experience, really diving into that and guiding them through that, letting them tell me what they want, and then me finding the resources and support to do that. Also, not, again, telling them that I understand, because I don't. And then also just being open and providing information. I think big thing, especially working in law enforcement, but just working in domestic violence in general, victims, survivors want information, whether it's positive or negative. They want to know what is going on. I always say that knowledge is power. The more information that I can give them, whether it's on investigations, whether it's on resources, whether it's how the system works, whether it's validating how they're feeling, I am giving them some of that power and control back that they have removed from them, from their abuser. And so I think through that, I have been able to not only create trust with the community, and then also, working in a community that's so tight-knit, word of mouth is huge.
Yes.
And so when I go to work every single day, and I tell myself that the work that I do today, I know is going to be talked about later on. It's going to be talked about with family members, other community members. So I need to come to work every single day to the best of my ability and try to do the best that I possibly can. And because, again, that is how the word spreads. But again, I think the biggest thing is just also validating that I don't know everything. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you guys are going through. I don't know everything, but this is what I do know. This is what I can help you with. This is what the things that I can provide based on what you have told me.
Yeah, for me, when I was prosecuting, obviously I don't share my personal story with people, so to set boundaries was more of a challenge for me sometimes. But I think, you know, and maybe it's just how I approach life in general, with authenticity and competence. I think as an attorney who's handling a case, and it's really the one thing I miss. Most people would say that they don't miss prosecuting domestic violence cases, but to me it is the hands-on work with the victims. Even if I wasn't successful in the prosecution, having that connection, having that time to listen, having that authentic connection, and being able to sort of, and I think information, you know, being honest that here's what's going to happen, here's what the system is, here's what my job is, and I get it that you might not be wanting to do X, Y, Z, and I get it, and you're right, but I got to tell you what my job is. So I think being open and authentic and competent in what you do typically will drop those barriers down, right? Because people will see past whatever it is that they come in with, whatever that preconceived notion is. If we can put those things, lead with those things.
I think owning it, right? That's just what I'm hearing. You just,
Yep.
you own it. I don't know. I'm not gonna pretend to know, right? And we call them courageous conversations in our office too. You know, I've learned so much through serving, right? More than I think that I could
Absolutely.
teach anybody, really. So that in itself, you know, is telling, but really owning it, you know, not walking in a room because I don't know it all. There are so many people that know way more than I do.
This person in particular who's super narcissist, you know, he went on to hurt other people. And I remember asking specifically why wasn't there counseling? I heard someone mention it's a public health issue. I'm shocked because this isn't dealt with as a public health issue at all. So
Nope,
I'm pretty
it's
sure a lot of his men have grown up watching their mothers abuse or have grown up, you know, just watching abuse, right? Violence in general. You know, officers have twice the amount of domestic violence in the nation. Like they are the biggest domestic violent people, you know what I'm saying? So we got them coming out to deal with domestic violence, and it's just a shitty feeling.
I think you point out a lot of those systems. I mean, you lived them. I experienced some of the same thing with law enforcement. So, you know, coming to my house and making me feel like a piece of crap, like it was somehow my fault. Certainly differently situated in how we move through the world, but similar circumstances as how a victim feels when law enforcement comes. It was not a good situation for me. I was sort of lucky in the sense I worked within the system, so I had people who could just help me that not everybody has or has that opportunity to have. So, I mean, I think your idea of the think tank is excellent. I'll say I suffered a fall unrelated to domestic violence, but I had this really horrible fall where I literally landed right on my face. And the only thing they were really focused on was like, and I hadn't been, but they kept asking me like, were you drinking? What was like, were you
Yeah, they're
drinking?
more
Like,
concerned with like
no, I passed out. I don't know. I had to have a heart monitor. Also, you know, completely unrelated, but I can, you know, sort of relate to that similar feeling about the emergency room because I thought you're not even treating what's happening. So I think you pointed out a lot of excellent systems issues. I don't know. I know there was a question in the back. I don't know if that was
I'm just
piggybacking
hoping
off of that, but
don't stop it at this.
Well,
point.
Yeah,
no,
that's it.
no.
I'm saying really for real, like you can get my number from you can get my number from Jennifer
Yes.
West.
One other thing that I wanted to share with you is myself and a number of other partners had to facilitate this. It was almost 1.5 year report from Global Rights for Women that was just published. And if you have the option or just the ability, read it. And so what it was basically, and it was victim centered. So we captured a lot of voices of victims similar to what you're sharing with us. And there were a number of identified gaps specifically with what you just shared.
Specifically for MPD.
Yes.
It's specifically for Minneapolis Police Department. It was, you know, obviously it wasn't involved with anybody but them. So
I saw a shift with your program, but it still was just like I think we need more time to talk to people who are out here experiencing it right now.
yeah.
We need,
Absolutely.
Like, a real group
No, it's a
to
great
ask
idea.
us all
Absolutely.
what's going on. And some people ain't gonna want to talk in front of all these cameras. I hope mine don't end up on this book, but
I put the phone down
I
right
like
here.
I'm just
Lisa,
Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing
No,
that
thank you for
information with
sharing.
us. It's powerful and
Yes.
important things to
Yes.
say.
sorry it was my little be here in 5 minutes.
No.
Lisa, you had a question, Lisa.
Yeah.
No, I didn't really have a question,
Oh,
I
yeah.
have a statement. I did, when I came into the room, I did say back there, is there gonna be any black women up there?
Mm.
And then when Jen came up there, I don't know what your nationality is, but I knew Jen was black because I know Jen.
I'm part black.
Okay,
Yes.
so I did have that question.
Mhm.
And we do work with a lot of women in our empowerment series, and a lot of them say the same thing. They wanna talk to somebody who looks like them.
Yes.
We all come in different shades of black, you know that. But they
And they're all
really do
beautiful.
say, right, but we're all beautiful shades of black. But with Cece, when she first came out, I knew it would be an issue, and I did tell her that. But she's the only person I call now.
Mhm.
I don't call anybody
Mm.
but Cece.
Mhm.
And no matter how busy she is, what her caseload is, I promise you, she calls back those people
Yes, she
that I
does.
need her to talk to. So
Yeah.
kudos, my sister, and I
Yes.
love you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think, so, yes, and that was something that we talked about when we were planning and trying to get someone here as well. But Deanna, you wanna talk a little bit about the grant?
Oh, absolutely.
mhm.
Yes. So we received a grant from OJP to serve the African American community, and specifically, it is in building trust and rapport, going out in community.
have to
And
come on
so we do have a cultural specific advocate to serve the Black community at the Domestic Abuse Service Center, and we have new pamphlets. We just actually revamp them, and they are over in the next room over here. So if you want some to take, please do so.
You know I want some.
Yes. And especially with that, it's addressing the historical trauma as well.
So you know when you did the test project, you know when you came over, you called it by name, I can't remember now. But that was one of the Susan Siegel, we met with her. And that was one of the biggest issues when you went to African American homes on
The hotspot
domestic
program.
violence.
Hotspot
Yes, the
program.
hotspot
Hotspot.
program.
Yes.
When you went to domestic African American homes in North Minneapolis, because that's where you started, you weren't able to gain access going back. And a big part of the problem was it was a white social worker who came to the door with a white police officer, and right there is system in the minds of African American people. So they weren't getting the response at the door on the return call to make sure everything was okay, to offer those services. So I do think it's important that you have people in community who, the families you are going to serve know. It's important to have those people at the table.
Absolutely.
But y'all go ahead, do what y'all do.
Appreciate you pointing that out, because it does matter. I do want to be respectful of folks' time. It is 7:30, and this is the close of our program this evening. We will be here though if folks wanted to come and chat a little bit, just hang around for a few. But thank you all for showing up, coming to hear us out, and for all that you do, because it really does take a village. It does take all of us.
Amen.